when the church is full of people who are devoid of the power of God? Why is that? Is that hard? Does that make things hard?
Yeah, because you're relying on your own strength at that point. It's pretty impossible to follow God.
It's impossible to follow God on a personal level when we're actually having an overcoming life. An overcoming life, a life of victory. Okay, let's say maybe you're living a life with God's power, but the people around you are not living a life under God's power. Why is that difficult? Why is it difficult to hang around people who say they're Christians, but aren't living in the power of God? Yes?
I need Christ in the flesh. I mean, I need people who are true and genuine. How can you be true and genuine and pray with somebody, confess your sins to one another and pray that you may be healed if they're not genuine?
Okay, so, because, that's part of what the enemy wants to do, because God's idea is to make His light known through His people, through the church. And if the church gets broken down, we're just a bunch of individuals that scatter. And then we become even more inward focused. It's a strategy of the enemy. On the one hand, we come to a congregation. Now, we can go to all sorts of different church. There's a church that's here. There's a church that's back here. There's a church that those are buildings. When people used to say, where's your church? I said, some of the church meets on Sunday morning. Because that's assuming that everybody that goes to church is actually in the church, is actually filled with the Spirit, actually knows God, is actually walking with God. That doesn't necessarily happen. Now, the more people that are within a place where the power of God is alive in their life, the more alive that people is, and the more damage those people will do in the enemy's kingdom, and more of God's kingdom will be brought down on earth in that place. Yeah, we want to rely on other people because how can we get help? But on the flip side, how do others get help if we're not filled with the power of God? Because one of the problems, if we go back to the passage here, one of the problems with these end-day religious people is that they're very self-consumed. What's the one problem that we really need to look out for? I don't know, there's about 35 there. I'd like to tell you the one problem we need.
Self.
And right, that's really what that's about up there. The first one sort of runs down on all of them. Lovers of themselves. Aren't we supposed to love themselves? Really, the word there is selfish. It's a selfish life. Now, Paul was talking about this to Timothy, who Timothy was his mentor that he was bringing up. He was trying to mentor him and bring him up in the faith. He was a spiritual son. And he was saying, it's going to be hard. And why did Paul say that? Remember some of his letters? He says, everyone deserted me. Do you ever feel like that? How many want somewhere where they belong? But the only way it's going to work with power is when Christ is alive in us, individually and as a people. Or else we're just going through, as it says, having a form of godliness. What's a form of godliness?
Looks good. More form than substance. Style than substance.
And you know, the form can have power if there's, you know, if you've seen some beautiful trees, haven't you, out there? Have you seen some beautiful trees where the sap has run out of it? The form is there, but the power is gone. It's got a semblance or a form of a tree. But if a big, maybe not even a big storm comes in, that thing's toppling down because the power's out of it. Now, it's interesting, it says here, how are we to respond to the two-faced believers? How are we to respond? Now, this is one that kind of hit me. It's a little rough. Now, a two-faced believer is, on the one hand, on the outside, they appear one way, but on the inside, they're different. The sap has run out. The spirit is not alive. It's the movie set. Looks great on the outside. I mean, you say, I just want to see how this thing's built, and there's nothing on the other side of it. It's the movie. That's what it is. So how are we to respond to the believers that are like this? What did it say there in the passage? Do you remember? Let's look at it.
Nothing to do with them.
It's a tough word.
You're such people.
Lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God. Now, it's interesting in the Greek there, lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God. Another way of translating that is lovers of pleasure more than loving God. That's the one that stung me a little bit at times. It doesn't say they don't love God, they just love pleasure a little more. Boy, if that doesn't define our culture. Wow. Having a form of godliness, but denying its power, have nothing to do with such people. Do you see what it says up there? Have nothing to do with people like that. So the question is, why are to respond in this way? Why have nothing to do with people like that?
Apples grows the whole bunch.
Okay. It's because I've given private lessons before. You know the people that I like to give private lessons to? Private trumpet lessons? Are the ones that never played trumpet. Because I start them out right. The hardest people to teach are those that have been around some other trumpet players that don't know how to play. And then they've learned a lot of bad habits. And then you got to unlearn before you relearn. Very difficult. If you're hanging around a lot of stale, powerless Christians, it's going to rub off on you. And you're just going to become stale and powerless. Now, what I don't want from this passage